episode 191 of Girl Take the Lead, where each week we explore womanhood and leadership. And I'm your host, Yo Kenny. Today, Andrea Sampson, Boomer, joins us to talk about storytelling and the importance it has for building abundance. Andrea is CEO and founder of Talk Boutique, and she blends her astute listening skills and insights into human behavior to coach leaders and speakers in crafting impactful stories. She spent over 2 decades in marketing and advertising and has transitioned into a role as a TED trained speaker coach. You're going to love what she has to say about our innate ability to be a storyteller and our ability to impact the future. Topics we covered in the episode were stories we tell ourselves about abundance. Everyone can be a storyteller. Limitations we have around storytelling. And my personal fave, storytelling and personal branding, which we also talked about effective storytelling, benefits of being a storyteller, and storytelling skill resources. Enjoy the listen, and here you go. So, Andrea, welcome to Girl Take the Lead, and thank you for coming today to talk to us about storytelling. I think it should be a great episode.
I'm excited. I'm really excited, Yolanda. This is it's exciting to be chatting with you and learning a little bit more about your audience too, and how I can support them.
Great. Yeah. Well, I think they will be very interested in hearing you talk a lot about, storytelling as it relates to branding, as it relates to who we are, and how we can be more effective with our storytelling. So, how about we start with you just sort of introducing yourself to the audience so they get to know you a little bit?
Sure, sure. So, my name is Andrea Sampson, and I have done many things in my life, from everything from being a fundraiser to being a direct marketer to a brand strategist to now a speaker's coach. And actually, what I've always been, and probably never would have said it until now, is a storyteller.
Mhm.
And as a storyteller, what I do is I help others to identify and use their stories so that they create impact for others.
Mhm. And I guess, as a podcaster, I kind of feel that sometimes well, not just sometimes, most of the time, as a podcaster, I'm also storytelling. But I think you have a notion about this that really helped me understand the bigger picture about storytelling and how we are all stories.
Yeah. Yeah. When I decided, so I spent most of my career in advertising. And in advertising, the work that I did was storytelling, of course, but I never really thought of it in that way. And no one ever really taught me how to tell stories. Um, and it wasn't until I started working in the TED world. So I spent a number of years working on a couple of different TED brands. The one that I worked on the most was TEDx Toronto. And what I learned working within the TED world was that stories are really carriers for ideas. They hold the context that allow others to connect with those stories. And how I came to understand this was, working as a brand strategist, which is where I was in terms of the work that I was doing at the time that I started working on the TEDx brands. Um, my job at the time was to do a lot of consumer research. And I would take large swatches of data because we would do research in the market with consumers. And the idea behind that was to come down to what was called a core consumer insight, the way in which what is the one thing that the consumer actually believes or thinks about something, and that we want to address as an ad campaign so that we can change or impact or influence their thinking on that thing. So what is the one thing that can the insight? And so I would have to take these large swatches of data, distill them down into an insight, and then we would use that insight as the basis for the campaigns that we would put out in market. Well, what happened for me was that as I started working with TED speakers, that was the exact skill that they needed. Because, here we had people who were doing amazing work in the world, who were literally changing the world, but they were so busy doing the work, they weren't telling anyone about it. And when they did, of course, no one understood what they were saying because they were often scientists and academics and technologists who were working at a very high level. I mean, I remember that my very first year working on TEDx Toronto, one of my very first speaker coaching clients was he had two PhDs, one in engineering and one in medicine. And and I remember going to the very first session with him, and we both sit down at the table, and both of us, but this was a few years ago, we both still had paper notebooks in those days, and we both open our paper notebooks, and I happened to glance over and I noticed that his entire notebook was math. I thought, oh my God, how am I going to be able to work with this person? I don't speak math, but the thing was, he needed me to be able to take all of that math, all of that, information that is so big and turn it into one idea, because that's what TED is. It's ideas worth sharing. And so, how do you take a life's worth of work, two PhDs, all of the work that he had been doing, and turn it into one idea?
Wow.
And that's what I had this skill I didn't even know I possessed because I had been doing it for years, narrowing everything down to a core insight. And so this became the idea behind the story, because that's what stories do. They create context for our ideas. And it's a powerful way to be able to connect with people because our stories are really about us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for those of us, and I hear this all the time, I don't have any stories. Well, actually, our whole life is a story. It just, we just have to decide what aspect of it do we want to use.
Yeah. What are some stories you think that we have about abundance or keeping ourselves from really thriving?
Having worked with so many people and women in particular, because I think that, not to say that men don't have the same issues, they have them in different ways. But I think with women, because of the way we've been socialized, abundance is one of those things that we have a challenge with. We often give rather than take, and that's, a lot of it comes into the nurturing side of being a woman. And so, as a woman, often abundance is something that we feel guilty about. We feel
Mhm.
like that if we have more than we need, we should give that away. Um, and I think therein lies the story. We have more than we need. Um, that's a story in and of itself, because the reality is we all need more than we think we have. And we need it because we need, not necessarily from I need to have a luxurious life. Maybe you do, and that's okay
Mhm.
if you do. Um, but it's understanding that's not about need, that abundance is a mindset and not a thing or a destination, that abundance is how we approach everything, and it's the generosity with which we live. And so it's a reframing of the mindset, because the story we're telling ourselves is abundance is about things.
Mm.
And when we reframe that to understand that it's about what we believe about ourselves, it allows us to grow.
Oh, well, I hope our listeners let that sink in because that was just some great insights into why storytelling is so important for for us to thrive and to have a sense of abundance in our lives. right? Because I think what you're saying to us is if we keep focusing on what we don't have and that story, we need to flip it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, I was, when there's a saying that, what you focus upon expands, right?
Mhm.
And so what are you focused upon? Are you focused upon the abundance, or are you focused upon the lack? And so often we are most aware of the lack and pursuing that with great fervor,
Mm,
in some ways, right? Because it's
right.
like that's all we can see. And so what you focus upon expands. So again, this is where I come back to saying when we look at abundance as a mindset and not as a destination, not as a place to go, but I feel abundant in my life, and I look around and I see that everywhere, whether it be in the abundance of love that surrounds me, or the abundance of food in my fridge, or the abundance of friends who are in my neighborhood, or the abundance of emails that I get every day. you know
Definitely.
I mean, abundance is all around us. And what are we really focusing on? And I think when we're talking about abundance, we forget that it goes beyond financial abundance. And I think that that is often where we conflate money and abundance. We bring these things to mean the same thing,
Mhm.
and they're not the same thing.
Mhm.
Abundance is a mindset. And then, financial wealth, there's nothing wrong with that either. And those are things that we can focus on as well. But we're looking at what we don't have and what rather than what we do have.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a little bit about what keeps people from seeing themselves as a storyteller. Because I think we can point to people we know and we go, oh my gosh, they can tell a story. They are
Yeah.
really, really good. But we don't recognize that we have those skills ourselves, right? I mean, what else do you see there?
Yeah, we're all storytellers. I mean, I always like to say that, we live one long story, right? That's our life is a story. And we often, we'll meet up with somebody and we start by telling them what happened to us the other day. And so we have these stories that we use quite naturally and that we tell quite naturally. But when it comes to the moment where somebody says, can you tell me a story about your life? We freeze up. Well, I don't have any stories. I don't have a story. Well, of course you do, the thing that I always like to say is that we all live the same life. It's just the details that are different, right? So when I'm telling you my story, um, you're actually hearing your story told in a
Mm,
new way.
mhm,
And so I think this is the thing that as humans that we have to start really leaning into, because what stories do is they connect us with each other. They let us understand that we're more alike than we are different, that we can help each other out in ways that we didn't even know we could. Because the thing is, when we understand that we are in fact living different versions of the same life, what I might be maybe have experienced something before you did, and you're struggling with that thing.
mm,
And now I can use my experience of having that struggle to help you get through that very same struggle, or an understanding. Maybe I, did something and suddenly came to a big understanding, and I can see that you need that same understanding, or vice versa. So our lives are these stories that are backdrops for the understanding that we're trying to have, their context, right? And so learning how to be purposeful with our storytelling is key, because it allows us to be way more understandable. So rather than just randomly telling facts, which is what often happens when somebody says, "What do you know about this thing?"
mhm,
And we tell them what we know. Well, if we start it with a story, let me take you to a point in my life where that wasn't true for me. This is what was happening, this thing. But because I went through that, I now understand this thing that I'm now experiencing in a bigger way.
Yeah.
And by doing that, I'm able to convey to you not just the thing that you were asking me about, but the emotional importance of it, the ability to connect with you. And now what I've also done is I've imparted the ability for you to remember it, because by telling you a story, I've actually activated many different sensory cortices within your brain.
Mm.
And that's important because memories are held all over our brain. So if I'm telling you a story about, maybe it's an emotional story about, my mom's last few days of life, and perhaps I'm giving you some of the details behind that, and of course it's very emotionally triggering for both of us,
Hmm.
because as soon as we come to an end of life story, we already know that there is deep emotions that are held there. And as I give you specifics around things that happened in those final few days, but then I sum it up by saying, I came to understand my mom so much better in those final days of her life. And I came to have greater compassion for who she was as a person, as a woman, and as a mother. Well, now that idea is imbued with the emotions of the story that I've told you. And when you hear that idea of, having compassion for others, the story I told you will be brought up, and that understanding will be deeper. And
Yeah.
that's what stories do. They connect us as humans through a life that we're all living with
Yeah.
different details.
I also think you have a nice connection that you make to branding, like
Mhm.
personal branding, because when you're telling those stories, we're telling who we are, right? What else do you see there about branding and storytelling?
Well, I think when we think of ourselves as personal brands, and I think it's one of the things that it's a triggering word, personal brand. And I've spoken to many people about it, and I get pushback from a lot of people on, well, people aren't brands. Well, I understand how people can think that, but I do believe that we have the same attributes as a brand. We have a personality, we have values, we have a promise that we make out to the world through our values. And so when we think of ourselves as a personal brand, where I go to are those values. Those are so key to who we are and what we intrinsically put out into the world. And being true to those values is essential. And so when we're building our personal brand, it is about being true to the values, but also being true to the idea. What is it we stand for in the world? For me, throughout my entire life, and it took me a long time to understand this about myself, but I've been deeply, deeply concerned about the future that we're creating for ourselves as humans. And I've always wanted to do something. It's why I went into advertising. I had this belief that I could use this powerful medium to impact our future through, creating better messages in the media. And it took me a long time to understand that, well, as much as I was an idealist in that capitalist world, um, I wasn't going to change the way in which that world worked. And so my messages were never going to get out. And that's where, when I moved into doing what I'm doing now, I'm much more directly impacting that future message. There that message that is impacting the future. And so a personal brand is the combination of your personal values and what it is you stand for in the world. What is your core purpose? And sometimes that's hard for us to really, chip away at, but it's there. And all you need to do is look back through your life and see the things that you've been doing since the beginning. And if you're early in your career, what is it that lights you up? What's your passion? And it's not that it stays exactly the same throughout your entire life, but it stays mostly the same. It's sort of like it's the general direction, not the specific direction that's important. So for me, it was about creating impact on the future that we're creating together. I couldn't have said that at 20, but here at, almost 60, I can confidently say that that is what I stand for. So that personal brand is my story. It's who I am. I recently went through a branding exercise actually on my personal brand. And it was really interesting. It took me, I worked with a branding professional. Even though I've done branding for many, many years, doing your own is really hard. And so, spend some time with somebody who can be your mirror. And that's what my branding person was, Laura Beauprolon, who has a company called Lab Creative. She was amazing. And what she's reflected back to me, and which I thought was beautiful, she, although when she reflected it back to me, it took me a few days to really align to it. She said, "What you are is a thought provoker." And I was actually, I wasn't offended, but I was taken aback, to be honest. I never thought of myself in that way. It sounded almost rude. Oh, it provoked thought. Wow, that feels a little bit, aggressive. But then I realized that, in fact, it's not about, it wasn't a statement on how I did it. It was a statement on who I am. And I provoke thought. That's what I do. I'm always thinking and I'm always um, curious. And that curiosity becomes a provocation for others. And that's what makes me good at what I do.
So I'm wondering, you mentioned this a little bit. What would you tell your 20 something self today?
Oh gosh, my 20 something, the first thing I would say to her is slow down. You don't have to be in such a rush. It all works out. I think the second thing I would tell her is you are different, and that's okay. It's actually going to be your superpower one day. That's why you do the things you do. I think in a world of sameness, being different is important.
And that makes for a very strong brand.
Yeah, it absolutely
Definitely.
does. It absolutely does. And I think it's one of those things that, when when I think of my own personal brand, and when people reflect my brand back to me, and even though I have hair that changes color often and many, many, many pairs of glasses, um, those aren't the things that people reflect back to me about my brand. And I think that that's important, right? Because we tend to think of a brand as being superficial, and a personal brand is not superficial. It has a lot of depth.
Oh, well, that's a great place for us to end our episode today. Is there anything else you'd like to cover before we sign off?
Yolanda, thank you for this opportunity. First of all, it's been fantastic having this great conversation.
Yeah.
And, just I'd like to invite your listeners to tell their story. Make sure um, that they are learning how to be storytellers, and practice often, because it's going to bring them so much joy. Storytelling is a way for us to connect and a way for us to learn so much about each other.
And where can they find out more and follow you and learn
Yeah,
some of those tools?
yeah, follow me on YouTube at the Thought Leader Academy. I do videos a couple of times a week where I'm teaching things like storytelling and idea creation. They can also follow me on LinkedIn. I am very, very active there. I'm constantly putting content out there. And yeah, and they can also go to our website, talkboutique.com, and sign up for our newsletter.
Thanks again, Andre. It was just so fun to talk to someone who gets my world.
Oh, Yolanda, this has been fantastic.
Thank you for listening today, and we sure hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please leave a comment wherever you listen to your podcasts, tell a friend about us, or join our public Facebook group, Girl Take the Lead. We also have a YouTube channel where your subscription would be appreciated. Once you're on YouTube, search at Girl Take the Lead. And we've recently expanded to YouTube Music where you can see a video of this episode. You can also check out our new store on our website, girltaketheleadpod.com/shop, and plan to return to it because we often update our products. Here are three takeaways from the episode. Here are three takeaways from our episode. One, we are all storytellers. It's innate to who we are. Two, storytelling can be learned, and Andrea offers steps and resources to help with this. And three, storytelling increases our understanding and helps carry ideas, deepens connections with others, and lives within the words we use to tell the story. Our next episode will feature our guest, Chrissy Grigolopoulos, the managing attorney for her law firm and author of her new book, Lady Shark: How to Become a Millionaire in Your 30s. She talks about challenging the conventional wisdom and emphasizing several themes we've covered on our podcast, like authenticity, resilience, and strategic savvy over traditional paths to success. I'm also thinking there's a couple books and topics I've been researching. And so don't be surprised if you see a couple soundbite episodes pop up. So please join us again. Talk to you soon. Bye.